year, oh, sorry. Right. So the question is about the home range issues that I was referencing in my grasshopper sparrow study. It was a small question that I had last year. When I came out, I got here a little bit late, so the only thing I was able to really do last year on the grasshopper sparrows was territory mapping and looking at the vegetation. And one of the things I thought about, it was very interesting last year, for those of you who live around here, Sonoita and the Las Ciénegas area there by Davis Pasture got some early rains in June, you may remember. And so, that's a little early for monsoons in general, and then the rest of the monsoon kind of petered out and not much happened. But it was enough to bring the grasses up, and they were growing nicely. Everything was green there by the time I was there, and by mid-July into the beginning of August. On the research ranch, they didn't get the June rains, nor did they get any more rains till I think actually after I left in August. I think there was some that came in. So I felt like I was I was very schizophrenic. I would go to the Davis pasture and everything would be green and thick and lush, and I could actually tell what the grasses were. And I'd come out and work on the research ranch, and it was like working here in the wintertime because the grasses simply hadn't greened up yet, so it was mostly the cured grass from the previous year. And so my sort of little thought to myself was, this is a lot of presumptions or hypotheses involved. If one might assume that a nice greened up, thick grassy area might have more food resources. There's more insects there, perhaps more seeds. You know, they eat seeds in the wintertime, but in the summertime they're feeding their babies with insects and caterpillars and things. And you might think that the food resources would be better on the greened up Davis pasture. So I thought to myself, if you had really good habitat on Davis pasture and stuff that was really not so good that year on the research ranch, would you have to have a bigger territory in order to get the resources you needed? You just simply have to have more space till you could find enough food. And what I did find, and I've not had a chance to do any statistical analyses on that, but you could see from the mean territory sizes that they were substantially larger on the research ranch, where, if my hypothesis was right, the food was not so good. Things were dried up. There weren't as many insects, and so they would have to have a bigger territory in order to find the resources they needed. So we'll see. There could be a lot of explanations for that have nothing to do with the rain. And so this year, things seem much more similar. So I'm kind of curious to see whether the same differences in territory sizes hold up, in which case it has nothing to do with my hypothesis, and I'm back to square one. But that's what science is, right? And don't forget, you can ask questions to Tice or Sue.
On one of your screens, you had the feather collection as one of the panels. I'm just curious what you were referring to there.
That's something I have not done yet. It's something that's in my permit if I decide to do it. And the idea is you can use feathers to do stable isotope analyses, to look at things like it's not so important in the case of, it's often used for migratory species, where you can, if they molt someplace else, like if they breed, like Baird sparrows, if they breed in Montana and they molt there before they leave and come down here in the winter, you get a feather here, and so the theory is, if you don't know the stable isotope thing, you are what you eat. So when you grow your feather, it has certain stable isotopes that can be analyzed, and you can determine, not a point kind of location, but there are distributions of stable isotopes across the country, and you could say, this analysis tells me that this bird was found someplace in this geographic location based on the stable isotopes. So for mine, I'm not sure. I put it on my permit in case there were some things. There's some interesting questions you can do with food. That's one of the things I thought about, is you can tell the differences in diet between grasses and forbs. And I'm already getting beyond what I know, which I'll have to learn before I do this, is like things like C4 and C3 plants have different signatures, and you can use it also to look at some diet things sometimes. So it's a thing for the future.
And I have a question for
The question is, did we see any change in amount of surface water in the perennial sites? That's the first question. I'll answer that first. So We did see a little bit there, but we're measuring surface area of the surface water. So some of these perennial sites, they're declining in depth of that perennial water, in addition to maybe some decline in the surface area of the water. So for those perennial sites, the amount of surface area underestimates the change in amount of surface water total volume, right? So, so our ability to show a decline either seasonally or across years in the amount of surface water in our perennial sites is not as good without going out there and actually measuring the depth repeatedly throughout the 1 kilometer transect, which we didn't do. But we did. It is noticeable, and so we do see a decline in the surface area of those perennial sites during seasonally, and it varies among those perennial sites, and we do see a difference across years sometimes in the short number of years we've been evaluating it. What was your second question?
The question was then, if so, have you seen any, and I know
Oh.
it's a short, in any changes in any of the bird species? In other words, are there some that seem to be more sensitive to those losses of surface water over a short period of time?
So the question is, do we notice any change in the bird community short term during the season due to changes in amount of surface water in the perennial sites? We haven't looked at that yet in the data. We could, but our ability to do so is somewhat limited because we're only repeating these point counts once every 3 weeks. So we don't have, our study wasn't designed to look at that question in particular. So we could look at it, but we don't have the strongest possible design to evaluate that, but we could.
I was a little amazed that you had a raptor essentially in your top 20 birds, and I'm wondering what the methodology was that allowed, that seems out of place for me. And I'm just wondering what the methodology was. Was it observations? I mean, are you getting a raptor that's moving from the one end of the kilometer to the other end of the kilometer, or is it
I'm sure. Yeah, for that top 10 list, that Letterman list, I'm sorry. The question was, he was surprised that there was a raptor in the top 20 given that we detected 130 species. And he's wondering whether that may be because of the way we quantified abundance. In particular, were we potentially recounting the same individual? And that's definitely the likely cause for that slide. All I did was merely add up the number detected at each point. So for a survey route that may have 10 points on it, I may be getting that same greyhawk. So that graph was just a kind of arm wave, not meant to say anything particular about the density of greyhawks. But you're right, that's not to say that the greyhawks are equally abundant as Aver's towhee. Very interesting question. The question was, there may be 2 types of ephemeral, or even 2 types of what we call intermittent sites. Ones that have become ephemeral or intermittent because of anthropogenic changes to the groundwater table in that watershed, whereas there may be some that have just naturally always been intermittent or ephemeral. And I think the question is there a way to quantify the value of these naturally ephemeral sites?
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting question, and in fact, it's interesting to me because, for one of the reasons is because, what if the nature and extremity and phenology of our monsoon season is changing? And so the hydrology of these ephemeral or intermittent sites, even subtle changes may dramatically affect migratory birds' ability to utilize these resources, because many of them, like I showed in that graph, have surface water at the beginning of the breeding season, and they dry out by late June. A lot of these birds are finished breeding by then, and then they get wet again during the monsoon. So I don't think I'm prepared to answer your question with anything substantial, other than to say it certainly is an area. It's one of the many areas that leads me back to my arm waving in my talk, saying, it's amazing that ornithologists have not spent a lot more time digging deep into these very issues, given the importance, the value of these environments to our regional bird diversity. Jeff?
Yeah, brings
The statement was, the observation was that a lot of times scientists work in isolation, and so an ornithologist or an ecologist, we work on our things, and the hydrologist may be working in that same watershed and is working on their things, and we often are so busy we don't get together and educate each other and find ways that we can learn from each other and share data. I couldn't agree more. In fact, one of the things that transpired right before we started this project is the National Park Service had, I forget what they called it, but they brought together scientists to one place, but instead of just having a one-day kind of symposium like this, they asked for everyone to camp out for a week near Rincon Creek. And so, boy, that's when you really talk, sitting around the campfire, and it was what got me, I think, excited when the Park Service approached me about this project, because I had talked to the hydrologists that had been working in Rincon Creek and already knew some of these things that we talked about Rincon, the watershed there, and the relationship between groundwater and surface water. And so it should be done more, and it's hard to do, but it definitely should be done more. Karen?
It's actually a question for Tice. I'd ask everyone one question.
Fair enough. Yes, Karen.
I'm curious, what kind of support is out there from Audubon or from other entities for areas that might be interested in building more of a program to do some of these citizen science type bird-related surveys? At Los Ciennegas, and of course, here we're at the southern end of it, but we certainly used to have, it seemed like, a lot more interest from Audubon, just people that birded and so forth, and some other projects that went on. They're sort of in the early days, and that seems to have sort of dropped off. So I'm just wondering
Yeah,
how those programs are.
The question is, what's the support or commitment from Audubon or other organizations like us to assist a land site like Las Ciennegas in getting citizen science effort going? And Las Ciennegas in particular, our interest would be high. And where we need your help is finding the crew of willing volunteers that would be willing to get the training. And so Scott Wilbur and myself would be more than happy to provide training. And I think in the case of like trying to address these wintering birds, I would like to involve the research scientists so that we develop an approach that is sound. And it may vary from what we've already developed, which works nice for riparian corridors and maybe not as well for some of these other sites. So the answer is yes, and one of our limits has been capacity. What Scott and I have had some good luck with, is, and this goes to volunteers liking variety, is having special project efforts. And so we got volunteers to go into the Cabeza Prieta and Oregon Pipe and do surveys down there for the last 2 seasons. And really what we're after is the LeCompte's thrasher and, real low density desert stuff. And we're starting to collect enough information, and it got Fish and Wildlife Service excited enough that now they have interns working on it. And then the Barry Goldwater actually contracted for some people, so it kind of had a snowball effect. And now we're all working together to try to collect that information. And that's one of our newest important bird areas that we're calling the Sonoran Desert Borderlands, is that combination of the Barry Goldwater, the Cabeza, and Organ Pipe.
Kind of a follow-up to that, Courtney, if you had a wish list of things you wanted to have collected, and you had Tice to train citizen scientists, what would you ask her? What would you want? And you too, Shen, what do you wish on your wish list of data that you could have?
Do I have to repeat that one?
Yes.
Yes, okay. The question is, if I had a wish list that where Tice could, be like the Easter Bunny and bring me anything I wanted, what would that be? And in the context of this project, which I'm going to limit that answer to, measuring these water surface area measurements, related to the question I received earlier, is these systems, many of them are very dynamic as far as how much water they have and how that changes seasonally. It's not the same each year. It varies. You go out there 1 week and there's water. You go out there 3 weeks later, there isn't, and it doesn't always necessarily make sense based on rainfall. And so that's something that a untrained volunteer can easily do. You're getting out into a beautiful area, and it doesn't take me to put one of my high-paid trained biologists out to do that when they could be doing more bird surveys. And so, same with vegetation measurements. Anybody that's ever worked for me or pretty much any other ornithologist comes to hate doing vegetative measurements, and so because you just want to go out there and find more birds, right? At least we do. So again, that's something that volunteers can be trained to do much more easily than identifying the chip of a brewer sparrow, or so that would be, I guess, what comes to mind first.
Janet, anything on your wish list?
Probably not dissimilar to what Courtney said. He's right about the veg measurements. you get volunteers, or you often get undergraduate students who come out who are willing to work for practically peanuts because they get an opportunity and experiences that they can put on their resume if they're going back to school, things like that. And they're great resources. They've often had lots of experience with birds, not always in my case with grassland birds, but I found that I had to ask people who had experience with birds, even if they didn't know grassland birds, they could learn them pretty quickly. But
I recommend you get junior botanists instead of junior ornithologists.
well, yes, and that's and you're exactly right. The perspective really is different depending on who you get. But I have people out there who are supposed to do bird surveys, and then I don't have enough money to get out another set of people to do veg stuff. So then it's like pulling teeth, because they go, oh, I got to go out and I got to do veg stuff this afternoon. Oh, I really would rather go. Yeah, and I'm sure that's true. And not only that, but those grass plants, they just stay there. They don't move someplace and hide. Although they can be very. There's a perfect combination. That's exactly right. But so there's always that dilemma of getting people to do veg things. From what little you saw with of what I presented on the winter sparrow stuff, that's a real difficult situation. The stuff that we did, particularly the mist netting protocol, is very labor intensive. I mean, it's not something you can do with a field crew of 5. We relied. I continue to say that probably this is one of the few places in the country where we could do the kind of labor-intensive winter grassland bird stuff, because there are so many birders around here. I had school classes come out, 5th grade students who are running around trying to hit each other over the head with a mist net pole, to snowbirds who were down for the winter, from Montana, and loved to come out. They got a chance to see sparrows in the hand. but that's really hard to do in many places. I mean, I'm not sure I could do it in New Mexico. I don't think we have the population of people with the concentration that are here in southeastern Arizona in the winter to do that. So that's a real dilemma. And Tice faces that kind of thing when she thinks about how to do winter bird monitoring over the long term when you don't have that kind of a resource. And so sometimes things like the area searches, things like the flushing transects, and things like that you can use. And you just have to be realistic about what you can and can't identify, because you're still going to have, when you don't have them in the hand, you're still going to see a lot of those birds. When we did our transects, we recorded every bird that we saw, not just the ones that we could recognize. So then we had categories like AMO, which stood for Amodromus sparrow, could have been a Baird sparrow or a grasshopper sparrow. We had AMSAB, because it might have also been a savanna sparrow. And you have those dilemmas of what to do with that, and whether or not you then say, I can't really say much. I can say things about a lot of birds using some of these other methodologies, but I can't really say anything very specific about Baird sparrows versus grasshopper sparrows versus savanna sparrows. And I don't know exactly what the solution is to that for some kind of a long-term winter sparrow monitoring thing. But there is always use for things like, for example, right now this breeding season stuff I'm doing, this is a small project, it's pretty much just me. So on the days when I am banding birds to just set just a single mist net up out there on somebody's territory, I can only do that when I have somebody to help me. Just to carry the stuff out there to set up the nets to record while I'm measuring the bird. So I've been sort of relying on my husband's doing slave labor for a week when he came down to visit, or other folks who I know there's a BLM biologist over at San Pedro who's been coming out and helping me on Las Ciénegas sometimes. So there's always room for that kind of stuff.
For next year, perhaps.
How much of that am I supposed to repeat? She was talking about that there are some programs by which Audubon and BLM have been involved in getting local students who come out and help for a summer as in an internship kind of program. And she's right. I mean, it's in fact one of the things I've thought about, because having learned what I've learned this year and what things I've been good at and what things that haven't worked so well, clearly having another person or two to help would be great. And so that's something we should probably talk about for next year, assuming I get my funding next year.